Aimee Gutierrez, and welcome to Ask the Doctor. We have quite a special show today, and we appreciate that you've joined us. Today, we're going to be talking about longevity, and our invited guest reframes the subject in a whole new light as How Not to Die in one of his most recent books. Today, we have the world-renowned Dr. Michael Greger to dive into all your questions. But before we discuss what may be wrong with us, let's discuss what's right with you. How are you, Dr. Greger, and what to you is the most amazing thing about the human body?
It never ends. Every day I'm shocked that we don't just dissolve into a puddle of goo at any moment. We literally have over 1 trillion cells, all working together. Like, how do they even know what they're doing? Amazing. Our brain is the most complicated thing in the known universe. How amazing is that? And it all works. We can think, we can do anything. The fact that we can take a single step is like an absolute miracle of nature. And yet we don't appreciate it. We take it for granted. We take better care of our cars than we take care of our own bodies, right? Right, we're putting in the high octane, we're getting the brakes checked. Yet look, your car breaks down, you can get another car. You cannot get another body. So we need to take care of ourselves and treat ourselves, with the kind of respect and awe that it absolutely deserves.
Dr. Greger, thank you for sharing that. That was a wonderful example. I loved how you compared to how we often take care of things that are really can be replaced, and yet we're not taking care of the one thing that we only get one in our whole life. Let's dive in with the bigger picture. Discoveries like the blue zones and others paint this clear picture that not all lifespans are created equal. How long has longevity research been a thing, and has there been any major catalysts that have really driven the research into longevity?
Well, I mean, initially, God, 100 years ago, right? Some of our leading killers were still some of the infectious causes of disease. But so we didn't have widespread antibiotic use until starting kind of mid-century, and so a simple scrape on the knee could turn into a mortal wound. Like, you couldn't do surgeries on people because you couldn't open people up; they die of infection, right? And so it was once we conquered, or at least temporarily conquered, kind of the infectious disease world, although there's antibiotic resistance growing. Then it became, okay, well, what are we going to die of? If we're not going to die what we typically would die of, all of a sudden, then what took forefront are these chronic diseases, these chronic age-related diseases like the heart disease, cancer, diabetes, etc. And so then that became the new nemesis for humanity. And so that really kind of shifted to, okay, well, then what can we do to slow down the rate at which we develop the diseases which remain our leading killers of today?
That's powerful, really well put. For most of human history, the picture is painted that average lifespans were much shorter than they are today. So could humanity be already heading in the right direction? Or what's your take on that?
It's interesting. I'm part of the first generation of physicians uh, overseeing a population that is going to live a shorter lifespan than their parents. Thanks to the obesity epidemic, we are the first generation with a shorter average lifespan than the generation before. That's never happened before, as far as we know, in recorded history. And it's primarily due to the obesity epidemic, which leads to increases in type 2 diabetes, increased risk of cancers and heart disease. And so even even over the last few decades, when we were getting more years of life, we weren't necessarily getting more years of healthy life. And that brings up this concept of health span, which is the period of life spent in good health, free from chronic disease and disability. I mean, what's the point of living longer if you can't enjoy it vibrantly? So here in the United States, we're living longer in sickness rather than health. So, a 20-year-old in the 1990s expected to live about 58 more years on average, while a 20-year-old more recently may look forward to 59 years, right? However, the 20-year-old from the 90s would might live 10 of those years with chronic disease, whereas now it's more like 13 years. So it's like one step forward, three steps back. So we're actually living two or fewer functional years. That is, two fewer years when we're able to perform basic life activities like walking a quarter mile, standing or sitting for 2 hours without having to lie down, standing without special equipment. In other words, we're living longer, but we're living sicker. And so that's why it's critical to not just do things that extend our longevity, but also how many years we're living in optimal health.
So seeing how the lifespan hasn't really improved, well, we're not dying sooner, we're actually just living in a state of unhealthiness and not being able to enjoy our years. Is that where some of the idea and the research for the book How Not to Die came from? And what would you say was the major goal with that book?
Well, so for How Not to Die, one realizes there's no such thing as dying from old age. So, in the largest autopsy series of all time, 13,000 consecutive autopsies, every single one of the centenarians, those that lived over 100, every single one, even those who appeared perfectly healthy before their death, the doctors swore they were perfectly healthy. When you actually cut them open, in every single case, they died from disease. Most commonly heart disease, which is a killer of most people, regardless of, earlier than 100. Number two was cancer. And so they didn't think they had cancer, but oh, it turns out they had cancer. So if the number one cause of death is disease, well, then what are we going to do to, prevent, arrest, or reverse the top 15 killer diseases? So that's the first half of the book, 15 chapters on each of the 15 leading causes of death. Talking about the role diet may play in preventing, arresting, or reversing each of our top 15 killers, but I didn't want it to just be a reference book. So the second half of the book is how do I make it practical, like the day-to-day grocery store style guide. So in which I center on my recommendations around a daily dozen checklist of all the healthiest of healthy foods I encourage people to fit into their daily routine. So not just eat fruits and vegetables, but specifically the healthiest fruits, berries, the healthiest vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables. Also encourage people to eat legumes every day, beans, split peas, chickpeas, or lentils, the healthiest source of protein. A tablespoon of ground flax seeds every day, a quarter teaspoon turmeric, the best beverages, how much exercise to get every day. Again, just as an aspirational goal. And it's available as a free app on iPhone, Android, Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen, just to try to include some of the healthiest of healthy choices into one's daily routine.
Thank you for these answers. We have some questions that came in on this topic locally, and we're going to cut to that video so you can go ahead and answer those questions.
Hi, Dr. Greger. I have a question for you. I just finished reading your book, by the way, How Not to Die. Super interesting. We're going to die. I know I'm going to die. I would like to live to when I'm going to live, and I would love to slide in full mental capacity, full physical capacity, and boom. That's what I would like. I have a history on both sides, parents who did develop dementia in their old age, very old age. My dad died at 98, mom died at 90. I would like to avoid dementia. I'm trying to do everything in terms of, an anti-inflammatory diet, keeping my mind active, learning new things, languages, dancing, all that. Anyways, I just wondered if you have any other ideas on how to live healthfully with mind and body right to the end.
So the good news is, there's this misconception that we have no control over whether or not we develop dementia. But the good news is, although Alzheimer's is currently incurable, it is preventable. Modifiable lifestyle factors outweigh the genetic component of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is related to the buildup of atherosclerotic plaque inside our intracranial arteries, the arteries inside our brain. And so things that help with cardiovascular health can also help with cognitive health. So what's good for our heart is good for our brain. So normalizing blood pressures, for example, in hypertensive individuals can help prevent cognitive decline. Controlling our cholesterol, those with a total cholesterol of 225 or more have 25 times the odds of ending up with amyloid plaques in their brain 10 to 15 years later. Aerobic exercise can improve brain function in both normal and cognitively impaired individuals, perhaps by boosting something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is this brain protective compound your brain makes. You can also boost it by meditation, caloric restriction, reducing saturated fat, eating high flavonoid fruits, vegetables, rye groats, The reason why in the original Adventist study, non-vegetarians have up to 2 to 3 times greater risk of dementia compared to vegetarians, maybe because of this increased exposure to saturated fat, oxidized cholesterol, something called AGEs, advanced glycation end products, which is created when you cook meat, endotoxins, pollutants like DDT in the diet. So basically, the best dementia-deterring diet would be one that's low in added sugars, salt, saturated fat, animal products, and processed foods, and high in whole plant foods, particularly greens, beans, and berries.
My aged mother is coming up on 85, and many people are telling me she needs more protein in her diet, specifically meat and cheese, but she doesn't really like it. What should I do?
She doesn't need more meat, and she doesn't need more dairy. So dairy is kind of liquid meat, right? Comes from the same kind of animal. It's got the saturated animal fat. It's got the cholesterol. Doesn't have the fiber that you see in plant foods. Surprisingly, when it comes to, there's this concept that, when we get older, we need to eat more protein. But when it comes to protein aging, less action may be more, reducing protein intake, meaning restricting protein intake down to recommended levels, is the only thing I could find that blocks all 11 pathways of aging. So boosting something called NAD, improving immunity, decreasing oxidative stress, inflammation, insulin resistance, as well as the cancer-promoting hormone, growth hormone IGF-1. So, surprisingly, there's no benefit to adding extra protein to the diets of older men and women in terms of muscle mass or muscle strength or muscle performance. Instead, the excess protein most Americans get causes a drop in the pro-longevity hormone FGF21, a worsening of the age-accelerating hormone mTOR. So we should strive to the recommended level of 0.8 grams per healthy kilogram body weight, which comes out to be about 45 grams a day for the average height woman, 55 a day for the average height man. So the healthiest source of protein, neither meat nor dairy, but actually legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils. So hummus, lentil soup, pea soup, there's all sorts of wonderful beans out there that can get you all the protein you want, but has the fiber and the antioxidants and the folate and all the benefits that come along with the protein in plant foods. And it doesn't have the baggage of what comes along with the protein in animal foods, like the saturated fat and cholesterol and hormones, etc.
Thank you for the answers to those questions. Quite often, people think of what special food to eat when it comes to longevity, but we know that much of the science is saying it's also about how much we don't eat. Just how important is caloric restriction to longevity?
Well, the benefits of caloric restriction appear to be due to the restriction of particularly problematic amino acids and protein. So the benefits of caloric restriction derive from the fact that you're eating less protein, but you don't even, you can either keep your protein the same, but just switch sources from animal sources of protein to plant-based sources like protein like beans, which have less of the problematic amino acids like methionine, which play a role in the aging process. And so you don't have to walk around hungry all the time. You just have to kind of eat healthy. Now, there may be some benefits to early time restricted feeding. So, decreasing your daily feeding window to, 12 hours or less, but critically important, earlier rather than later. One of the reasons that the, Adventists in Loma Linda, California may live so long is they tend to make breakfast or lunch the biggest meal of the day. And indeed, we should try to front load our calories. Earlier in the day, the better. Not eat once it gets dark outside, not eat after 7 p.m., no late night eating. And front load as many calories as possible. That's really the healthiest way to eat.
Thanks for that response. Another theory of recent note is that humans should eat diets entirely consisting of animal meats and avoid carbs and vegetables. How well do these diets, like those, do for longevity? And if not, why do some people report feeling so good after eating a steak, let's say?
Yeah, carnivore diets are kind of like the flat earthers of the nutrition world, right? But unlike all meat diets, believing the earth is flat isn't going to kill anybody, right? If you want to know what's healthiest for the human species, well, Dr. David Katz, the head of the Yale Prevention Research Center, was so sick and tired of all this crazy internet garbage that brought together hundreds of the top nutrition scientists in the world. So look, you want to know about climate? Yes, climate scientists. So he wanted to pull together, like the IPCC of nutrition, hundreds of the top nutrition experts in the world to agree to a consensus statement as to what is the healthiest diet for human beings. And you can go to truehealthinitiative.org to see what they said. Spoiler alert, it's a diet centered around whole plant foods. In terms of why someone might feel better on a carnivore diet is because they're cutting out a lot of bad. So if you're eating meat, you're not eating donuts. If you're eating all meat, you're not eating a lot of the ultra processed garbage that is contributing to people's ill health. And some people are sensitive to certain foods. So you have celiac disease, you're sensitive to gluten. If someone with celiac disease all of a sudden ate a all meat diet and so they weren't eating bread anymore, they'd feel better. But it's not because they were eating meat, it's because they weren't eating gluten anymore. Other people, have, irritable bowel syndrome or migraine headaches that are triggered by, in some cases, healthy foods. Watermelon is the most common plant-based trigger for migraines or something. If you are sensitive, or if you're allergic to, soybeans, about 1 in 150 people allergic to soy. So if you're allergic to soy and all of a sudden, you all you do is eat meat, all of a sudden you'll feel better. It's not because you're eating meat, it's because if you just ate a healthy diet without soybeans and ate other beans instead, you'd feel just as good or presumably even better. This kind of like eating an all meat diet is like an elimination diet. Some people are sensitive to corn, some people are sensitive to nightshade vegetables, whatever it is. So it's basically, eliminating most things in the diet. And if you feel better, well, something was making you feel bad. But, if you're going to do an elimination diet, why not switch to just eat sweet potatoes or something, of which almost no one has any reaction to, or tapioca or cauliflower. I mean, there's some foods that no one really reacts to. And so then, okay, you feel just as good because you're cutting out something that's making you feel bad. And then you start adding back foods and find out what's the culprit.
That's fascinating. It's always interesting to me that some of the biggest advocates for these diets give you such a hard time when you decide to include more plant-based foods. They ask about where's the B12 coming from, but then they haven't given you any pushback when you were drinking soft drinks and eating your donuts.
Not to be minimized. Vitamin B12 critically important for anyone eating healthy. So I want to encourage people. It's as simple as 2,000 micrograms once a week. Get all the B12 you need. Costs about $5 a year. But take your B12 and don't eat the donuts.
Now, talk to us a little bit about genetics. You're definitely emphasizing what we can control, but what about what we can't control? How much does our xenotypic inheritance play a role in how long we live?
Oh, only about 25% of the difference in lifespan between people is due to genetics based on studies of identical twins. And so that means the vast majority we have some control over. And so that is certainly good news. In fact, there's even a Netflix documentary on identical twins randomized to eat either a healthier omnivorous diet or a strictly plant-based diet, and saw significant benefits, including a slowing of aging within just 8 weeks of eating healthy. Longer telomeres and kind of on down the list, benefits just in this short time frame. Same genetics, but just a different diet. So genes can load the gun, but diet pulls the trigger. And accounts, for example, for the Nigerian paradox, where they have among the highest rates in Nigeria of the Alzheimer's gene, but actually some of the lowest rates of Alzheimer's disease anywhere in the world. How does that make any sense? Well, it's because what does the Alzheimer's gene do? It's the primary cholesterol carrier in the brain. As long as you have a low enough cholesterol level, then it doesn't matter as much what kind of genetics we have. And because they were eating diets centered around whole plant foods, they weren't suffering the ravages that they normally would get if they were eating a typical Western diet with that kind of genetic predisposition.
Fascinating. I'd never heard about that Nigerian paradox. Very interesting. Now, another principle that people often bring up when it comes to changing their diets is that it's only for the elite. A lot of people think that it's very inaccessible to everyone, and just wanted to hear a little bit about what your take is on that.
Well, first of all, it's important to recognize that one need not make drastic changes. It's not all or nothing. Even basic, common sense lifestyle factors can mean living, a decade longer, not smoking, not being obese, regular exercise, more fruits and vegetables, right? And it's never too late. It's never too late to stop smoking, to start moving, to start eating healthier. We really do have the power. And if you think about it, some of the healthiest interventions are some of the cheapest interventions. So the Global Burden of Disease Study was the largest study of disease risk factors in human history, found that of all foods, the one most associated with extended lifespan, if we could just eat one food, it would be legumes. Right? It was like dried beans, peas, cheapest source of protein, healthiest source of protein. And it's like, I mean, you can't get easier than that. And that is what's going to, make us live the longest. So, go out and get some hummus.
On that note, what do you think of the work of Brian Johnson or people like Peter Thiel?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm all for expanding our knowledge base. But what I just want to emphasize is that we already have the knowledge for this tremendous. I mean, we have that $1 trillion pill, anti-aging pill that biotech has been promising us. We just have to take it in the produce aisle in the gym. Like, I mean, it's like we already have the capacity for this dramatic increase in lifespan now, but that's within kind of normal parameters. Perhaps with the advent of AI, we'll be able to kind of crack the code and have these truly groundbreaking longevity interventions. I'm all in favor. And so, hey, maybe we just have to live long enough to live forever. Like, you don't want to die the day before the technology is invented. Like, like the last person that dies. Obviously, the technology, brings up all sorts of that kind of technology would bring up all sorts of ethical issues in terms of income distribution and who would have access and who not. And right, I mean, but I mean, there's nothing that about the biology that doesn't make. There are animals that live forever. There's something called the immortal jellyfish, literally lives forever unless somebody eats it. But I mean, there are mammals that live hundreds of years. There are these whales that live hundreds of years. We can see, we have, they have harpoons embedded in them from over a century ago. Like we know that, it's absolutely amazing. So, I mean, it should be possible. We haven't yet cracked the code, and if AI doesn't kill us all first, we may get some benefit. But in the meanwhile, we have tremendous power over our life destiny and longevity, our health destiny, and that the vast majority of premature death and disability is preventable with a healthy enough diet and lifestyle.
Thank you for giving us that encouraging information. What encouragement it is to hear that we can each do stuff to increase our longevity no matter what our net worth is. I got another question for you. We know that you're working on a new book. Can you give us any new insights into longevity?
Oh, well, yeah, I have 3 books coming out this year, 3 books coming out next year. So already the How Not to Age cookbook came out in April. The 10th anniversary of How Not to Die is coming out this December, revised and updated. I also have a book this month coming out on lowering cholesterol, maximally lowering cholesterol with diet. Next year, a book on ultra-processed foods, a book on how to read research papers, and finally a book in December 2026, How Not to Hurt, on lifestyle approaches to pain management.
Wow, that's a lot that you have coming out. I'm excited to see them and read these books and learn some of this amazing information. How long are you planning to live, Dr. Greger?
As long as possible. I've got stuff to do. As long as people are, as far as I'm concerned, it's your body, your choice. You want to smoke cigarettes? You want to go bungee jumping? You want to disconnect your smoke alarms, not wear your seatbelt? You do you. But you should. We're responsible for the predictable consequences of our actions. And as far as I'm concerned, I just want people to be educated, to be fully informed, and then make whatever decisions they want. What I don't want is for people to make decisions thinking that it's healthy when it's actually they're being conned by some commercial interest that's trying to get them to do something that isn't actually going to help themselves or their families. Once people are fully informed, my job is done. I retire to some tropical beach somewhere. Unfortunately, I'm afraid maybe, particularly in today's kind of social media environment, it seems like for a while there, the hope was that this democratization of information, the truth would rise to the top, right? Like we'd get all the best of the best information. Maybe that's just my idealistic brain thinking, but in actually, like, it was almost the reverse. Like the road to the top, like the craziest stuff. And so I'm afraid my work is more important than ever. And I'm not going to be able to retire anytime soon.
Definitely sounds like you have your work cut out for you and you won't be able to retire anytime soon. But you did comment that when you do retire, you wanted to retire somewhere warm. Can you tell us, is there any link between where you live and longevity?
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm trying to think. Well, the blue zones. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of Mediterranean blue zones closer to the equator. But yeah, no, sunshine vitamin D, is critically important for those who live at high latitudes, particularly during the winter months or year round. If you're not getting adequate sunshine, you may want to supplement your diet with 2,000 international units of vitamin D3. Yeah, but it also, sun exposure is the number one factor behind skin aging and wrinkles, and so it's a double-edged sword.
It's interesting you touched on that with the blue zones. That ties into one of our last questions here. There's something that we've been hearing that blue zones are actually being diminished in size due to the fact of fast food establishments and the Western lifestyle. Is there any group that's defying this trend?
There's only one blue zone left. And so when they talk about these 5 blue zones, they're talking historically there were 5 blue zones. You go back half a century, there was a blue zone. There's only one blue zone left. And that's the Seventh-day Adventist in Loma Linda, California. The only surviving blue zone to this day is a red, white, and blue zone right here in the United States. And why are they able to maintain their health behaviors when everyone around them in the world is not? Why are they the only population? It's because of this religious tenet that their body is their temple and that they should take care of themselves. And so they're not smoking as much, they're exercising more, they're eating more fruits and vegetables. Even those who eat meat eat less meat than the general population, and they benefit because of it. If only everyone could learn from the Adventists and to have better respect for the one bodies we were all given.
Wow, Dr. Greger, you've blown us away with all this fascinating information. I'm so glad you've been on the show with us today, and I can't wait to have you back after some of these books come out and we can hear a little bit more about what you've learned in all of your research. Thank you for being with us.
Looking forward anytime. Keep up the great work.
If you've enjoyed this week's episode of Ask the Doctor, please join us for the next episode as the conversations are still going. In fact, you can also be a part of them. So please submit your questions to askthedoctor@3abn.ca and leave a message with your question. Thank you for watching.